Have you ever watched a night scene in a movie and wonder, how does that look so good? If you've ever shot at night, you probably know that it could be a bit tricky to get a nice and clean image in less than ideal conditions, not just at night, but also in any low light situation that you might come across. But thankfully, there are a few simple but very essential steps that you could take to elevate the low light scenes in your next film. So I just thought I would share those with you today. Hey, what's happening, everyone? My name is Ryan, and today I'm going to show you 3 key steps to follow for getting great results when filming in low light conditions. Let's get into it. All right, so let's just dive right into the first step, and that's just to ask yourself, why are we filming in these conditions and at this location for this specific scene? Now, there are many reasons why you might find yourself in a low light situation. The first being that sometimes it just can't be helped. For example, you may find yourself in a situation where a client wants you to film in a specific location, or maybe you're in a run and gun type situation on a documentary film where the lighting is less than ideal. And another reason could be that that's just what the script is calling for. Sometimes it's just a matter of a narrative decision that you might feel that is best for the scene or the overall story. Now, all of this can be explored in the pre-production phase of your film, so it's really important to just take the time to plan all of this out and really get to know your scene. If it's not crucial for telling the story to film in a specific location or at a specific time, then it might just be easier to move locations or set the scene at a different time. It's always easier to alter the script and move locations than it is to make it work. So just explore all the different options and why you want to film this scene at this time and at this specific location. But what do you do if you have no other choice, or you just really set and love this specific location and time for the scene? Well, let's talk about that. After establishing your location and the time of day that you want to shoot your scene, it's now time for step 2, and that is to adjust your camera settings accordingly. The first thing I always recommend whenever I get this question on how to get a great image in a low light situation is to try filming in a log profile. Now, this is what's going to get you the most dynamic range within your image, saving as much information as possible within the highlights and the shadows. This is going to make it easier in post when you go and color grade that image. It's going to save all of the detail that it can without breaking the image down too much to where it just kind of all falls apart. Now, this is a very powerful tool, and I go deeper into this in some other of my videos, so I'll leave links to those videos down in the description below if you're interested in learning more. But what if you can't or prefer not to film in a log profile? What do you do? The first thing that you could do is to check your camera's native ISO. Sorry about the bad lighting right now. I just have my tube light on because I'm using the battery for the CMO, and I had to take it from my key light. When adjusting your ISO, you really want to be careful. You want to stay within your camera's native ISO, and in doing so, you're going to get a cleaner image. Here's what it looks like when using the extended ISO right below my camera's native ISO, and it doesn't look very good. But when I bump it back up to 12,800, it starts to clear up quite a bit. There is a lot that goes into what native ISO is, but in a nutshell, native ISO is the ISO range where your camera is going to produce the cleanest image with the least amount of noise. Anything lower or higher than this is going to be what's called extended ISO, which in this case can produce a lot of noise within the image and is especially noticeable in low light conditions. Now, most cameras on the market these days will have what's called dual native ISO. For example, my Sony FX3 has a dual native ISO of 800 and 12,800, which is also ridiculous and super helpful in low light situations. But what if the native ISO on your camera is much lower than that? Well, another option on the camera side of things would be to just pull up your aperture or f-stop higher, if possible. Faster aperture speeds will allow for more light to enter into your camera's sensor, therefore giving you a much brighter image. However, depending on your situation, this can also give you a really harsh look from things like practical lights and street lights, because as you add more light into the frame, all the other lights in the frame become brighter as well, giving you this unnatural look. So one of the things that you would have to keep an eye out for is the brightness of these bulbs. So these market lights that I have behind me. So at this point, I'd want to expose for the market lights and then bring in additional light. Now, when you bring up your aperture, you are allowing more light in, but you are starting to bring the light up on these bulbs as well. And right now they're not overexposed, but they would be if I were to bring the aperture up like this. So one thing that I can do is bring my overall exposure down and then bring in some additional lighting. Hey, Future Ryan here. Sorry to interrupt, but I was just watching the playback and I realized I forgot one important thing, and that is depth of field. Now, it's important to remember that when you are using aperture to expose your image, you're also going to be adjusting the depth within your frame. For example, if you're adjusting your aperture to bring more light in, you're also adding what's called a shallow depth of field. This is when everything in the background is nice and blurry and your subject is clean and crisp. This is really great for adding depth within our frame and really making us feel like we're in the scene with our characters. Now, on the flip side, if you're using aperture to pull some light out of the frame, then you're gonna get what's called deep focus. Now, this is used when you want everything within the frame to be nice and clean and you really want the audience to see all of the different details within the frame. Now, I talk a lot more about this in depth in another video I did last week on composition and framing, so if you'd like to learn more, I'll leave a link in the description below. But ISO and aperture aren't the only ways to bring more light in. You could also adjust your shutter speed. However, I highly recommend that you don't adjust your shutter speed, and here's why. I always highly recommend not touching your shutter speed if you can help it. And this is especially in low light conditions because this can make for very unrealistic motion blur and can even have an unsettling look. So just an added bonus there. Well, now that we've covered all of the settings on our camera, what else can we do? Well, you could always bring in your own lighting. Now we're definitely gonna dive into that, but before we do, it's important to know why you're bringing lighting in. Light plays a primary role in capturing an image. There is a whole lot that goes into that, but in its most basic form, our camera sensors read the light in the frame to imprint an image onto our cameras, in this case digitally. So bringing in any kind of light into the frame is crucial when filming in low light situations, but it's important to know how to bring your light in to make it feel intentional and not distracting. Let me explain. In film, one of the primary goals is to keep the viewer within the story without any distracting elements that might pull them out. If the shot looks like it was lit with studio lights, then it's a dead giveaway, which will pull them out of the story completely and be at the forefront of the viewer's mind. The good news is that there are a few simple techniques that you could use right now to elevate your scenes when in low light conditions. Number one is to use practical lights. This could be a street light or a floor lamp, window light, or any kind of ambient light that you have available within your scene. But this might not be enough, so the next step would be to use your practical lighting to motivate the studio lighting that you might bring into the frame. All you would need to do is to make sure your light source is the same color temperature, the same intensity or brightness, and is coming from the same direction as the practical light. All of this will make the scene look a little more realistic and a bit more believable, and you'll have less of a chance of pulling the viewer out of the story, only focusing on the production value of the film. So it really is pretty incredible what you can do with just a couple of lights here at night. Even what I'm doing right now, where I have my tube light behind me and this key light right in front of me, it's doing a lot and it's pretty pitch black out here. Here's an example of this same scene without any light at all, and then our practical light, and then added in with our tube light that I set at 2700 Kelvin to give a little bit of a hair light on the back of our subject being me, and then our key light, which I also set to 2700 Kelvin to try and match the lighting that was behind me. All of this really gives a really natural look, but also lights up our subject enough to where we could see the detail within our subject and kind of control the highlights and the shadows within the scene. You can really see the difference, and there is a lot more lighting within the frame, making it just feel a little bit more believable. All of these lighting techniques are going to provide a much different feel and emotion for your scene and for your film. It will take a couple of practice moves and edits to really get to know what you need to do in which situation. In the end, it really depends on the story, your resources, and your creative vision as a filmmaker. So I just want to encourage you to try some of these techniques out for yourself and just see what works best for you. Well, that's gonna do it for me, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. If you like this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, friends.